r/NoSleep. Posted by ATMarkov. Nothing's been the same since the crash. I, 38 am the janitor for an elementary school just down the road. I love my job. I take pride in making the school look great for the start of every class day, and all the kids smile and wave and call me Mr. Janitor, despite my name tag, as they walk by in their neat little lines. At least, everything was great, until the crash. One morning, 7 o'clock sharp as always, I was turning out of my driveway to hurry to the school. But just as I did, a car came speeding over the hill to my left, and struck my car. Once I woke up in the hospital, something didn't feel right. It was oddly quiet. A nurse came in shortly after, but she seemed distant. All of her movements seemed slow, as if we were both underwater. She unhooked me from all the machines, which I noticed hadn't been making any noise, and handed me back my clothes. The hospital provided me a bus home, which was nice, since I knew my car would be totaled, and I knew I'd never afford a new one. Once I was home, things felt a bit more cozy. I still felt a little cold and dizzy, but assumed it was whatever painkillers they'd had me on. The next morning, I figured I'd just walk to work. It was only 10 meters or so up the road, so I'd just have to plan for it. I woke up the next morning, half an hour earlier than usual. In a bit of a daze, I changed into my uniform, and set off toward the school. It was strangely quiet, and I finally noticed why. No birds were chirping. The sky was a steely gray, as it had been the day before. Once I was at work, I was scarcely noticed. The kids would occasionally glance up at me, but almost never waved or smiled. For most of the adults, it was as if I wasn't there. Strangely, this felt right. I kept up my mopping until lunchtime, and retired to my closet. I glanced at my reflection in the shiny chrome of the boiler, and noticed I was unusually pale. I shrugged it off, and ate my cold tuna sandwich. The next day was more of the same, but I noticed the cold grayness of the weather seemed to make its way indoors. Walking through the brightly colored hallways, all I saw were dull tones. It was as if the color had been sucked out. On the way to my closet for lunch, I took a painting off the wall of the second-grade hallway, which had used to be a bright watercolor of a rose. I hung it up in my closet, irrationally hoping to save away some of the world's color. In doing so, I thought to put 2 fingers to my wrist, and checked my pulse. Nothing. I tried again. No beat. I tried my throat, nothing noticeable. My skin was cool to the touch, and paler than the day before. I considered calling my doctor, but the world outside felt distant, almost imaginary. I went back to mopping, noticing that the students stared into the ground as they walked by, or straight through me as if I didn't exist. The worst part was that I started noticing shadowy figures when I turned quickly. I would see a blip of cloudy darkness when I slowly turned around, and if I rounded a corner too sharply, I'd sometimes see an indistinguishable dark mass somewhere in the distance. Some nights later, I started having nightmares, which was uncharacteristic of my normal, calm sleep. Sometimes in the dreams I was at work, and one of the little children would look up at me, and its eyes would be dark sockets. Sometimes I would be standing far above the school, looking down into fog, and slowly plummet. Sometimes a car would come up the hill just as I checked my mail, and veer off the road toward me. As the days went on, the clouds stayed gray, and the outside got foggy. Sounds continued to get more muffled, and my thoughts and movements continued slowing. It was as if I was a character in a play, and submerged in a lake, all at once. My skin was clammy and gray, and nobody noticed my existence. The dark figures kept getting sharper, sometimes appearing just behind me in my dreams, which had become third person. I could start to make out a hooded individual, cloaked in shadow, staring at me. I almost took comfort in it, the only being that could still recognize my existence. I felt cold all the time, but no blankets or warm clothes helped. As the days ran on, and the world slowly faded, the only thing that grew clearer was the figure. He was braver now, standing just out of sight, around corners and objects. I knew I should be scared of him, but I could hardly feel anything, let alone fear. Finally, one quiet day, as I walked the halls with my mop, it showed itself. I stared into its hollow eyes, willing it to do whatever it was fated to. It held out its hand, as if for me to shake it. Suddenly, for the first time in weeks, I flashed back to my old life. I saw color again, saw smiles, and outside, saw green foliage and a blue sky. I wasn't ready. I shook my head. As if in recognition, the figure bowed its head. I felt the world go black around me. I woke up, once again in a hospital bed. This time, when the nurse walked in, she was animated and talkative. I was surrounded by little noises, The beeping of my pulse, the chirping of birds, footsteps in the hallway. Once I was released, I saw green and red and orange autumn leaves, and the next morning, I showed up to work again to cheers and waves and welcomes back. I don't know where I was for those few weeks. I thought it was a dream, at first. But in my janitor's closet, just behind the vacuum cleaner, hung a faded, darkened watercolor, a watercolor of a rose against a gray sky, splotchy and wilting. Next story of this video. Posted by ATMarkov. My school used to be an abandoned hospital. So, I should say this now, I live in a town that's seen better days. An old nuclear plant, built to power a nearby city, had closed in the 80s and our whole population went with it. We used to have a hospital, a gym, a Walmart, basically everything, but in the death spiral following the closing down of the plant, one business after another closed. Our original high school, built in a rush when the plant opened, collapsed when I was a young child, and the town had to rush to convert the first 2 stories of the now empty hospital into a makeshift school. 12 years later, there I was, about to graduate from that now not so temporary school. The other wings of the hospital had been thoroughly sealed off from the school part of the building, to keep us out of it. Or, as I later found out, to keep whatever was in those wings from getting in. I was your typical dumb teenage boy, and my friends were a mix of equally dumb teenage boys, who Madge, closeted gay, dumbass wanted to impress. With our school being attached to an abandoned hospital, rumors and dares were constantly circulating about breaking in and exploring the sealed-off wings, but as best as we could tell, nobody had ever done it. They did a good job isolating us from the hospital. Solid concrete and steel had been used to block off the hallways and stairwells, which were then covered with drywall. It would blend in seamlessly if they'd had the funds to paint it. I joked throughout my high school career about being the second student to attempt breaking into the abandoned hospital. The first was the legendary Jeremy P., who allegedly got in so much trouble he was expelled and moved out of town the next day. Which stung. After 2 years of trying to get his number, well, a few days before graduation, it got real. My friends officially dared me. Under the cover of darkness, camera in hand, I snuck out of my parents' house that night. It wasn't a far walk to school, but I'd never made it at night. I noticed how as I got close to the school, a looming 8-story building shaped like 3 sides of a rectangle, the background noises got quieter. The massive concrete walls and black windows must have absorbed all the sounds of birds chirping and lone cars driving along the distant highway. I snapped a photo looking up at the building's facade, dull and brutalist, with the occasional broken window. As for how I'd get in, I had a plan. There was a metal awning over a sealed-off side door, and if I jumped, I could climb onto the ledge of a broken window, and use a rock to knock away any shards of glass still clinging to the sill. The awning was about 10 feet up, but parked next to it for the last few days was a broken-down van, that was just high enough I could pull myself onto it. Once I was up, I got another photo, looking down on the parking lot. I looked up at the window, and could just make out a fire sprinkler on the ceiling inside. I heaved myself up onto the ledge, and peered in. The floor was covered in rust stains, from rainwater that had gotten in and eaten away at the radiator. There was still a bed, with disheveled sheets, and it looked like a raccoon or a bird had at some point made a nest in them. A bin in the corner was piled full of gowns, now faded to white with pale polka dots. Having forgotten the rock, I knocked a few shards of glass off the edge of the window with my camera, and crawled through. So far, it wasn't too scary. In fact, the rush of doing what no student had, to my knowledge, accomplished before had my heart beating in excitement in the dim moonlight streaming through the window. I snapped a picture of the room, all the proof I'd need to solidify myself as king of the school. Out of the corner of my eye, the door to the room, cracked open, drew my attention. Behind it was an almost complete blackness. Getting into the window was one thing, but exploring the hospital, maybe finding bloodstains or getting up on the roof, was the real point in coming. What was I, a coward? I opened the door a bit more, and peered through, into a long hallway. It took my eyes a minute to adjust, but I saw a disordered, hastily abandoned scene. A bed half blocked one side of the hallway, and gowns and metal tools were thrown about on the floor. To the other side, the hallway took a sharp turn, and around the corner was nothing but pitch black. A little apprehensive, I chose the side with the bed. As I walked past it, I noticed something that gave me a slight chill: scratches in the plastic on part of the frame, deep scratches. I pressed onward, passing a desk. I pocketed a pen, and a pack of cigarettes I found in a drawer. Paperwork had names and times listed on it, among other things in shorthand that I couldn't read. The hallway proved to just lead to more rooms, with cloudy unbroken windows letting in the slightest bit of light. Gathering my confidence, I turned back toward the spooky hallway. As I peered around the corner into total darkness, I heard something. A distant wail. I shot backward, and sprinted back to the room I'd come in through. I caught my breath, trying to rationalize what I'd heard. Probably a creak as the building settled. Or a fox. Or some other animal. At this point I knew the sensible thing was to turn around. I couldn't even take pictures of what I would find, since it was too dark. But my curiosity got the better of me. I edged along the wall back to the corner, and peered around it. It was still and silent, eerily so, but that was how it should be, I reasoned. Feeling the wall as I went, I crept down the hallway, until the wall turned into a corner. My foot hit something. Stairs. I climbed up the stairs carefully, my hand on the rail. By now, even with my eyes fully adjusted to the darkness, I was lucky if I could see something a foot from my face. Once I had made it up a story, I paused, and again heard a sound. A quiet shuffling around the corner to my right. Fear crept back into my chest. I knew it was something harmless, like a raccoon, but I was immobilized. At last, I remembered my camera had a flash. I had an idea. I'd step around the corner, and take a picture with the flash on. In the brief flash of light, I could see it was something harmless, get an idea of the path in front of me, and keep going. I reassured myself, and stepped around the corner. I held the camera up. Flash. And my heart stopped. I saw the outline of a figure. Pale white, against a hallway of open, black doorways. Its eyes hollow. Its hair long and matted, solid black. Its hands with uncannily long fingers. Fingers with sharp claw-like nails. I opened my mouth involuntarily, but only a hoarse gasp came out. I turned and ran, down the hallway in the other direction, until my outstretched hand hit a wall. I had been blinded by the flash, and couldn't see that the hallway to my left had a window at the end, but I ran that way anyway, until finally, I saw the outside world. I looked behind me, heart beating, and saw nothing in the dim light. I looked to my left and saw an emergency stairwell. I wasn't saved though. My heart sank as I realized, it would take me down to a sealed-off wing. I would have no escape. My only choice was to go up, back into the pitch darkness. So I did, as far as I could. I knew I was on the 4th floor, and counting my turns, I ended up on the 8th. There were no windows on this floor, and the ceilings were low. I knew that from looking at the outside of the building, I'd have no way to tell in the moment, since I saw nothing but black. I felt my way along the wall, not knowing which way I was going. I started feeling closed doors along the wall. I eventually realized they had plaques, and I tried to feel the lettering with my fingers. Office, one said. In smaller lettering, Dr. Stoll, Orthopedics. I kept going, until I felt an open door. Knowing it was futile, but desperate, I reached for a light switch, and flipped it on. Miraculously, it worked. A single one of the lights in the ceiling came on. I listened faintly, and even thought I could hear a distant generator. I turned and closed the door as quickly as I could without making noise, and locked it. The frosted glass gave me no view of the hallway. Inside the office was a desk. One chair behind it, 2 slightly less comfortable chairs in front of it. To my left, the room continued some distance, with 2 beds hidden away by curtains, and a second, closed door to the hallway. Not much light reached over there. I sat down in one of the less comfortable chairs, afraid to choose the one where I'd be stuck behind the desk. I was trapped. I wasn't alone, though. I had started to feel a presence in the room as soon as I'd shut the door. As if compelled by some otherworldly force, I stood up and walked toward the first bed. I pulled the curtains aside, nothing. Then to the second. Breath shaky, I pulled the curtain aside, and saw a body. The face was contorted, staring directly at me. It wasn't very recognizable, after a year had passed, but it was Jeremy. I realized, he hadn't been expelled after all. And that wasn't why his family had moved away. I heard the scream again, much louder now, reverberate through the halls. I didn't even have time to think. I flew out of the office, and saw in the faint light another switch in the hallway. I hit it, and dim emergency lights lit the way to a second stairwell, which I descended 2 steps at a time. I heard the sound of something dragging behind me, then the scream again, just behind me, so loud I couldn't think. In front of me was a window, dusty, 7 stories above the ground. Nowhere else to go, I leapt through it. I just woke up. It's been 2 days, apparently, but since I landed on soft ground and hit some branches on the way down, I got out with some broken bones and a concussion. As you can imagine, It wasn't the greatest experience waking up in another hospital. Thankfully very much alive, nurse was quick to comfort me once she noticed I was awake. I'm writing this post as a warning. I got lucky, getting out alive, but next time you're thinking about poking around an abandoned building, maybe reconsider.